Hi, Florian. Welcome. You are the CEO of Dataiku. Dataiku is the single platform for everyday AI. Dataiku is one central solution for the design, deployment, and management of AI applications at scale and in production. We're going to talk about what that all means. For context, Dataiku is a pre-IPO company, which most recently raised a Series F, led by Wellington Management about 6 months ago, with other investors, including ourselves at Firstmark. The company over the years has had a long list of accolades, including being named a leader by Gartner several years in a row. And most recently, just last week, Dataiku was named both Partner of the Year for Machine Learning by Snowflake, and also AI Partner of the Year by Databricks. So congratulations on all of this, and we'll double click on those relationships as well. But I'd love to start from the top and maybe have you give us a sense for the general scale of Dataiku, and then we'll get into the product.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, there are many ways to talk about a company, and yeah, sometimes you can start with the numbers, and because we are a little bit about numbers at Dataiku, yeah, fine, starting with that. And so Dataiku is 10 years old as a company, and in terms of numbers, we are north of 1,200 employees, and we ended up last year north of 200 million of revenue, of annual recurring revenue. So we sell one software, our platform, Dataiku, across the world, and have been growing fast in the last few years.
Great. So let's start with the platform. So from the very beginning, Dataiku has had that very clear vision of building one centralized platform that does a lot of things for data science, machine learning, and AI. What does the platform do today?
So we started to build the platform from the, let's say, the vantage point of an early CDO back 10 years ago. And I was myself able to put myself in those shoes because, well, back in the day, you had like few enough CDOs that you could be actually hired as a part-time CDO here and there. So I was like kind of like playing the mini CDO, which is a fun thing to do. And from this vantage point, the perspective was that, well, connecting more the domain experts, the business stakeholders to the data science and technology teams was paramount, first. Second, the ecosystem of data was very complex, like the databases and so forth. This was like a big mess in terms of number of algorithms or things you needed to stitch together to get anything done, second. And third, and last but not least, there was this misconception of like getting multiple tools and then having to connect them together to build the full life cycle of data to AI. And my gut sense was like, oh my God, this is very, very, very complex plumbing. Like it will cost a lot. It's actually very complex to maintain and connect those things. There is lots of value if like you could just like have everything in one place. So easier it would be. So that kind of like was the starting point of like creating the Dataiku platform and building a platform where you could, well, not prepare your data or do machine learning, but do both at the same time, where you could do building a model, which takes time, but also by clicking on a button, pushing that into production and getting things up and running. And do all of that with the mindset of being coder friendly, as in the data scientist doing Python, but also clicker friendly, as in someone coming from a domain that can be a finance engineer, that can be a mechanical engineer, that can be a marketing research person, and so forth, that could be dig into the data by themselves with the platform. So being no code, low code, and being full encompassing of this life cycle of data to AI, which enriched a lot across the years. But essentially, it's like you get data, you transform it, you build model, you move it to production, you build an app, you're happy.
Yep. So the collaborative aspect was very much native to the vision of Dataiku. So just to play it back, it's a no-code, low-code solution for business experts that can do technical things without having to go into the code. But it's also very much a code friendly platform where technical expert can get into the details? So can they still play with the tools they like, the more technical folks?
Yeah, I think we built the platform trying to find a balance between building a platform very easy to use for the business, as in someone coming from the business could click, get their data, do lots and lots and lots by themselves. The motto was like being self-service from the perspective of analytics and ML. And why? Because you don't have enough data scientists actually to get things done in most organizations. But also not to be a naive platform. And especially the world of open source was great, is great, will be great. And so the idea was to have a platform where it was super easy to code, to run multiple coding environment, to get in your favorite IDE, whatever it is. You can choose Jupyter Lab or VS or whatever. You can all do that within Dataiku because we don't care about wars between softwares around us. It's all about having one place where it's very easy to integrate and orchestrate this very rich ecosystem of tools, of databases, of algorithms that is forever changing in the world of AI.
And do you want maybe to give us a tour? You mentioned data prep all the way to AI. Maybe take the different examples in that chain and sort of double click on specific capabilities, and perhaps put that in light of the most recent release of Dataiku 12, which just came out.
Yeah. So I think there are multiple indeed definition of the life cycle of data and AI, but our own is very simple. It starts with that with Dataiku, you can actually connect various systems and databases. Actually, you can connect to most of your existing databases, would that be cloud, non-cloud, and so forth. And you can search within them in order to find the relevant data you need for your projects. Step one, you search and find. Step two, most of the data requires some processing to get anything done. It can be about transforming something, about parsing a date. It can be about merging two columns into one. It's about extracting some information which is inside a text field or whatsoever. All of those, it can be about correcting the data within one column because the original input is wrong and whatsoever. So that's like all of this data preparation, data quality things, which can take ages. So we built within Dataiku a visual environment where you can click around to actually correct your data, a little bit like you would do row by row in Excel, but actually the way you do it is by actually adding rules that transform your data and then can be applied to a full, very large data set. And here, actually, I can introduce another concept of Dataiku, which is that Dataiku is a very lazy platform. We try to do as little compute as possible. We are French at the beginning, so laziness, we know all about it. And so at Dataiku, actually, all of this computation will be actually pushed down to your existing database. As in, it's not yet another system where you have to import all of the data and like copy it and duplicate it. Like, no, it's actually pushing down this the compute there so that you can get refined, clean data also in your new shiny database. Then another step in Dataiku is that you can then do AutoML, automated ML, automatic ML. I never actually got what AutoML actually was, the auto part. But essentially, it's a capability of building a model automatically. And here, actually, in the real life, you've got at this step a wizard, because there are multiple ways to actually skin a cat or actually build a model. And specifically, you can ask whether you want to have a very simple, very easy to interpret and explain model, or have a very performant, but actually slightly more black box kind of model. And so you
the product will automatically generate, like pick among the whole spectrum of different models that could be suited for certain tasks. The platform will automatically surface several options.
Yeah, and then there is no magic. The platform will actually test different kind of models on your data, optimize performance and parameters and so forth, in order to actually get and build the best possible model of your data, so that you can forecast anything coming out of your data, and classification, regression, and what else. And then at this point, you've got a model. In real life too, what you need to do is actually take a look at it to make sure that you understand the performance of the model, what were the actual variables actually used in the model. Why is it important? It's because in our experience in real life, well, many people would try first and foremost to build models that makes no sense from a business perspective, as in you are trying to make a prediction out of a data which does not really exist in real life when you will have to make the prediction, as in you're trying to predict the future with the future that doesn't exist, or these kind of things. So you find obvious, you either build obvious models, or sometimes you're building a model that makes no sense from a causality perspective, as in whatever things is depending on the temperature in the room, but in fact it's correlation and not causation. So as a business person, or actually as a person, as a human being, you also need to inspect model in order to make sure that you understand that they actually make sense from a business perspective. And it's an important part of the process, both from a quality of the model, but also in many instances, and especially when manipulating personal data, from a bias mitigation perspective. So you also can do that within the platform. So I describe all of those steps of things you can do with Dataiku. That all of those can be done visually, but of course, if you are more like kind of like a coding person, if you want to take things into control, if you want to use or integrate your own specific algorithm or piece of code, or do some whatever SQL for transformation, or Python or R, or even Julia if you want to, Dataiku is actually also a very strong coding platform where you can integrate pieces of code and actually build them into very easy to manage projects. And all of that leads to build within Dataiku a full data project. And a data project is a combination of several steps where you are transforming the data, you integrate them, you train a model, you use a model, you train another model, you use a model, you do some backtest and so forth. Real data projects are actually multiple steps. And what we also provide with Dataiku is the ability to see all of those steps in one place, understanding what is doing what and who is doing who, because also in real life, many data projects involve multiple people and multiple teams. So there is lots of value of being able to segment and partition who is doing what, and have this traceability, understandability, ability to just comment, discuss, and collaborate in a way that is more visual than Git, essentially speaking. Just because Git has some, let's say, limitations, if you want to really have the ability to have a discussion which is linking the logic you want to apply to the data and the data, and also Git and coding environment remove any possibility to have a meaningful discussion with people coming from the business, just because they won't get into code. So you can do all of that in Dataiku, and then comes a next part of the magic, the so-called MLOps kind of magic, as in this ability to move a model to production. And here again, a misconception is that moving a model in projection is about turning a model into an API, which is, of course, one step, but also in many instances, it's about robustifying models that can be applied in a batch fashion, robustifying the fact of automating the retraining of a model, the update of a model when the data underlying is drifting, and how you can make that in a robust enterprise-grade manner. And how you can also have a multiplicity of virtual environment variants of models, and actually not spin one, but hundreds of models, depending on the cases and context and so forth. So building this kind of like robust MLOps capabilities. And last but not least, we also provide in Dataiku the ability to build some visualization and apps. And here, it's not for us, let's say, the goal is not for us to build yet another version of dashboards, because I think you've got enough dashboard players on planet Earth in order to, well, I don't know, in order to do what? In order to fill all of our screens and ads forever. But it's actually to focus on the kind of apps that require, let's say, this additional layer of intelligence and interaction that are linked to having predictive models. And then the kind of apps where you can input some form of like parameters, play scenarios, and so forth, that are typically used by some more like expert people on the field in order to strategize using data, making some forecasts on their sales, but like also inputting their own hypothesis and running a model on top of it. Like these kind of scenarios of apps that are typically not so easy to build within a business intelligence framework, and where building from scratch a full web app is usually also too complex from the perspective of the enterprise. So we also help with that with our platform. So long story of what I see being the life, regardless of Dataiku actually, what I see being the actual real life cycle of from data to AI in the enterprise.
Yeah, lots of product. Okay, amazing. Maybe talk about some use cases, and perhaps in the context you mentioned apps. I know you have apps on a vertical basis, industry basis as well. So some use cases, some example of how customers have been using the platform, and perhaps a bit more context on those vertical apps, pre-built apps.
Yeah. In the recent year, we started to add pre-built apps to our platform in order to further accelerate the work of our customers and help them in terms of either ideation or just delivering on those apps. But indeed, there is a variety of use cases of data and AI in the enterprise today. That's for sure. In terms of use cases, it can range from use cases in sales and marketing environment and function, which are the usual suspect of analyzing your churn, understanding your customer profile, segmenting them, building next best action kind of capabilities, which are like very common and that apply today both in a retail environment, but also in banking environment, but also in telco environment and so forth with our platform, which are full niche of use cases. But there are also more and more of use cases of data and AI that are applied to more core operation-oriented manufacturing functions in the recent years, where we also serve use cases that are about understanding and enabling your infrastructure or your fleet or your manufacturing operations, depending on what kind of company you are, as in like a large manufacturer or a utility or a logistic kind of company, where you gather in one place all of your sensor data, as well as your sales data, all of your operation data, and you enable people from your shop floor, people from your assembly line and so forth, to be better at building models that help understand quality control, demands, the number of parts they will need, and so forth, in order to meet the business demand. And so you see this switch actually in the market where people having very typically a master or an engineering degree that were using Excel a lot in order to build their day-to-day operation and build their KPIs and so forth, and were using this as a logic in order to drive the business, as in like how many parts should I actually order next week in order to fill the demand on my assembly line, are able now, because they've got more data and more facility to do so, to do by themselves, or with sometimes some help from a data scientist, to build an actual model that will help them get better at this kind of job. And the beauty of data and AI is that it's a market that is becoming very mainstream, as in applicable to many industries, but where you still have like lots of use cases where you indeed find very quickly strong uplift. As in indeed, in many businesses, applying models that are actually not so complicated, but like still built with real life data and with large amount of data, you outperform your previous business rule by a significant margin.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Of course, we're going to talk about generative AI in some detail in a minute. But I think the interesting point here is that obviously AI has become a lot more mainstream since November 30th, 2022, when ChatGPT was released. But a company like Dataiku has been deploying AI in the enterprise for all its global 2,000 customers and beyond in production at scale for a very long time now. So what's very interesting is that it's this combination of the industry is still very early, but at the same time has existed for a while, and it's in some ways it's new and upcoming, but in other ways it's actually something that people have been doing for a long time.
Yeah, indeed. I think there is this well, I think it's hard to grasp how deeply AI, machine learning, and so forth is used day to day by the enterprise. I think we get it as sometimes consumer just because we see some of this AI through some of the platform, and actually for people listening us today, either through Spotify or YouTube and so forth, of course, you can see the recommender system either at the right or bottom of the screen, which is some form of machine learning application, but indeed many business processes are including some form of machine learning, automated forecast, automated decision making. It's been the case for a while, and it's becoming mainstream. And it's becoming mainstream while not being the case for every company or every processes. Whereas I think that in the next 5 to 10 years, it will be actually universally mainstream, as in most companies, a very vast majority of companies will have hundreds, if not thousands, of automated systems that automate ordering and some form of cash management and some form of customer targeting and so forth, in a way that is way more sophisticated than today. As in, like, you got AI a little bit every day in the life of the company. And today it's maybe like only 2 days a week. Like you've got the AI Monday, Tuesday, not every day.
Before we jump into generative AI, quick segue through the Databricks and Snowflake relationship. So in the context of everything you've described around the Dataiku platform, how does the integration work, and what is the relationship in terms of like overall positioning in the market?
Yeah. So we started Dataiku 10 years ago, which was like back at the time of Hadoop. And I think that most of the audience of this podcast is probably aware of Hadoop, but let's assume that. But so, Hadoop was an open source distributed technology to try to store and distribute compute back in the day, still actually used and relevant today. But indeed, back then, you had lots of hope in the enterprise in order to build central data lakes with some limitation in terms of making it happen. But already, as a company, our perspective was that the underlying data infrastructure, as in like where you store the data and how you compute, will actually change quite a bit. And there will be a diversity of sources of data from the perspective of organization, even with a central data lake. And so there will be lots of benefits in being a layer sitting on top, enabling to abstract the logic of the compute and how you manage projects and so forth to the actual location of the compute, like where the compute actually is and where the data actually is. So already for us, it was pushing down to either traditional data warehousing systems like the Teradata or Netezza of the world, or pushing to Hadoop. And so we've seen across the years changes there, and indeed lots of adoption and move to the cloud in terms of analytics in the recent few years, which was for us actually extraordinary in terms of acceleration for the company. And indeed, we do work very well with the modern platform to store data in the cloud, including Snowflake and Databricks. Our perspective, again, is to be, in a sense, lazy, as in we enable and accelerate the fact of building business-oriented analytical application in the cloud, so they can be actually built faster and in a more self-service way by the business. And it helps actually create more traction, compute, and for the data platforms themselves.
Great. So generative AI, as I alluded to, what does that change? How do you think about it? How do you build it into the product?
Yeah, so we've been seeing for, let's say, quite some time a mix of structured data and unstructured data use cases in Dataiku, and that's one angle I can start with. And but indeed, an unstructured kind of project would be ones involving images, involving text, and so forth. The kind of like image detection, NLP kind of use cases. And it's true that typically those use cases were actually just harder from a technology perspective, requiring more data science, requiring more work in terms of data labeling, and so forth, compared to a structured data set, a structured project. And so what we have seen is that indeed companies building these kind of unstructured projects were focusing quite a bit on those where let's say the ROI was obvious. If you're a high-tech manufacturer and you've got an assembly line building complex things, indeed, leveraging images in order to automatically detect defects and changes you have to make on part of this assembly line can be very relevant, because it's like $1 million or hundreds of $1 million assembly line where winning 1 hour or 2 can actually be worth 1 million. So building this full system of labeling images and so forth, and getting into the weeds of understanding them, even if they are very specific, and building the data science around it, that's worth it. Or same if you are a big transporter and you are moving big things like planes or boats, and you have to put them out of the circuit. Indeed, it worth actually making this happen. But like more casual use cases, not worth hundreds of millions, where let's say not really a focus in terms of unstructured data, just because the risk-reward formula was not really working. So it was maybe only a few percent of the use cases on the platform. I see first and foremost generative AI as an ability to actually first accelerate all of those use cases and also open up the realms of the possibles. Just because now with the kind of integration we've got of generative AI, many natural language tasks can be actually done faster, because many use cases of extraction of information, including complex one, can be also accelerated. And also because you can imagine brand new use cases where you use generative AI in a creative fashion in order to rethink the experience or how you deliver the data, or get one step further in terms of personalization of the output. And so but again, from my perspective, there is some parallel between the current situation of generative AI and the situation of data warehousing back 10 years ago. As in a multiplicity of technologies, a multiplicity of models, question marks in terms of how you integrate them together. And I think from the perspective of the enterprise, there is lots of value in terms of abstracting this a bit. And so we built in our platform and are building integration with generative AI, where it will be very easy to move from one model to the other, start with something that is using an API, and then move to something that could be more like an open source or custom model you control and build yourself, to move to production, for instance. All of those use cases where you will want to be able to build those applications at scale and have some control, just because they could be at the end very difficult to scale or maintain.
Are you starting to see actual use cases for generative AI in the enterprise, or are the customers that you speak with mostly in sort of learning mode and feel the pressure to do something, but don't necessarily know what to do just yet?
No, we do start seeing them. There is, of course, as of today, which is so July 23, still lots of companies operating in discovery mode, as in wondering whether they should purchase this $3 to $5 million contract from a consulting company to help them discover what can be the use cases or not. So there is still this kind of things happening on the market, but also there is a start of a real life usage of it, including in large enterprise. And we see a mix of use cases that can be ranging from the end of the funnel, kind of like marketing use cases where you just extend existing customer targeting application that could be built in Dataiku, where the previous step was just to, let's say, predict the next best action for a given customer or the product to suggest, to the following step, which is to further personalize the email or the next message to send to such customer and find there some uplift, as one example. But it's also down to lots of potential more back office or operation function, where, for instance, in finance, let's say, in all of those areas where you've got complex document systems that are actually very valuable, let's say, for instance, contracts in insurance, where you use generative AI, or actually LLMs, not generative AI per se, in order to extract automatically information from contracts in order to better understand the distribution of your risks, and run then some analytics onto it that was actually not really possible before. But that apply to insurance contracts, that apply a lot also. I think we see lots of demand in anything related to ESG and or policies and so forth, where you got lots of documentation where you want to kind of like be better at matching the text and the numbers, definitely. And then we also see lots of traction in many, let's say, research or complex environment situation, where people in the field, would that be a researcher or actually someone in an assembly line, when they've got an issue or want to explore something, are sometimes overwhelmed by information, as in like quite literally. They don't want yet another dashboard just because they don't know where to look at when they've got one given problem. So we've seen there's this ability to create new kind of application where instead of building a fixed dashboard, you actually have a system where you ask a question, as in like the quality on assembly line 3 is dropping. What could be the cause? And you actually get back some information, some graphs or whatsoever that are within the context of your question, which is a new way to distribute information in the enterprise, probably more geared toward, let's say, at this current stage of technology, experts that needs to get deeper into problems than the general audience in the enterprise, but like which is a way actually also to distribute data and intelligence differently. So kind of like all of in all of the spectrum of an enterprise, as I say, the end of the funnel sales, your back office, very finance function and so forth, but also everything which is more like R&D or operations.
Great, very interesting. In part because Dataiku has been working with large enterprise type customers around the world and the government, you have been very sensitive to the ethical and fairness aspects of AI in general, deploying in the enterprise. In the specific context of generative AI, obviously there's a lot of open questions around how those models are trained and where the data comes from and all the things. And you've come up with a framework, which I believe is Raft, as a mental model around thinking through what those issues might be for generative AI. Maybe just talk to this and how you think about the ethical aspects.
Yeah, I think that's the current situation for this enterprise is that most of them are at this crossroad where some of their ethical values or their implication for AI are not clear. Meaning, even if you've got a strong value system as a company, does it apply in terms of AI is still TBD. And they are all hearing or waiting for regulatory frameworks that can be the EU one or the US one, or actually any kind of other countries that are also not fully implemented. And so they have to actually balance a need for innovation because, well, most CEOs I talk to agree that from a strategic perspective, they can't really wait for AI because in all likelihood, some of their competitors will actually do better than them if they don't do it and will be at the be just getting a competitive edge on some part of the business by being the first in terms of applying AI. So they can't wait on one side, but on the other side, they have to understand what is the risk mitigation process of AI. And risk mitigation is, about the compliance factor, but it's also about reputational risk that could get higher. It could be about just the regulatory risk of having this need to be able to report back then. It's about understanding the control or the quality and just the business quality of especially generative AI, because potentially systems slightly harder to control or understand. So there is like this mix of all of this. And what we started to build is a framework we call Raft to stay on top of it, like on top of the water, I guess, which is about being thinking in terms of the accountability, in terms of the fairness of the system, in terms of how transparent it is, which is essentially back to your ability to report up what it does, and how reliable the system is. And to start having scorecard and frameworks to do those kind of self-assessments, with the expectation that I think that many companies will have to adopt these kind of systems a little bit ahead of time in order to manage some of the internal expectation in terms of control of AI or expectation from their customers, but also in order to be more ready when the compliance and regulatory framework will be there, and not to then find some hard stop. And just be at the minimum of bookkeeping and safekeeping in order to actually be able to navigate those waters.
Great. And maybe zooming out a little bit, what do you find particularly interesting or exciting in the generative AI world, whether that's concepts or companies or products that just by virtue of what you do, just like come across them and you think, oh, that's really cool, that people may or may not know.
Yeah, well, first applying to us, I think generative AI is also the opportunity to democratize many things, as in, and I see it as we apply it to our own product, this ability to add yet another layer of interaction with the user, as in talking to your computer, well, writing or asking with text, which will further reduce the cost of entry in many tasks, as in we see that we can help with generative AI in order to make it even simpler to transform a data set or prepare a data, for instance, or understand what the system is doing. I think there is in our particular case, I think that there is a future of let's say enterprise software where you've got system of this mix of visual and text and potentially coding representation of things, where you can navigate between code and clicking and talking to your computer in terms of getting things done. And that will be very, very powerful paradigm. That's one. Then talking about the ecosystem in general, I think that what I see as very interesting with generative AI is that it's like a new Lego block enabling a new generation of hackers for many vertical applications. I think there are like many vertical applications that can be built using and building specialized agents that combine multiple models and some business rules, and just solve and try to accelerate or automate a boring human task in a smart way. And I think there are like lots of a new generation of hackers that will be just doing that without having necessarily the need of having a PhD in natural language processing and deep learning to do so. Just a sheer willingness to solve a business problem and get into it and find the fastest way to do it. So I think all of this new wave of innovation, I think there will be some limits to it and some hype and some inflated expectations, of course, but I think there will be also lots of great and interesting companies.
Very cool. So as we are towards the end of this conversation, still in the vein of zooming out, I'd love to just switch tacks for a minute and talk about lessons learned and in the context of leadership, perhaps. So, I've had the privilege of working with you for something like 7 years now, since we led the Series A back in 2016. And one thing that I've found really amazing working with you, and I mean this objectively, and I don't mean this as an investor gushing about a great CEO, but like one thing I've found amazing working with you is that you generally seem very much sort of ahead and in control. I think it's one of the very hard things about as a leader, as a company grows as explosively as Dataiku has over the years, is to not be running around like headless chicken, going from one fire to the other. I'm curious if you have anything to share, whether that's your personal disposition as a human being, or if you have any lessons learned that people listening to this podcast could learn from.
I think it's maybe stating the obvious, but I think as you grow the company, the easiest way not to be flying around and shutting down fires seems to be having good people you can rely upon in order to either extinguish this fire for you or not create them. And I think that when you build and grow a company, regardless of the business acumen or technical skills or whatsoever, building a team of people around you that can be just keep having the same mission or motivation to solve the problem for the customer, to get things done, and so forth. That's I think that's one of the key. I don't know if it's a personal disposition or just being the privilege of being in the field of data and AI also, because ultimately in the field of data and AI, it was so obvious that this field is great and big and growing and so forth, that it's also very easy to keep everyone focused on the mission.
Mm-hmm. And you came from a very technical background. You were a data scientist yourself. You studied math, very advanced theoretical math, if I remember correctly, as a student. But today you spend a lot of time, running a company, talking about sales, talking about customers, thinking about all of this. How did you learn, and how do you continue learning about those topics that are fundamentally not your background originally?
Yeah, well, first I was never technically a data scientist, but maybe that's a detail. But definitely a software engineer or a product manager, depending on the time. But indeed, but whatever, it's indeed a big difference between being let's say a software engineer and being business and sales focused. And first, well, I'm not sure if I learned yet. Maybe. Still lots of things to be learned, but yeah, at the end of the day, it's a lot about making the good connection, as in finding the right people. And ultimately, in the current world, and from my vantage point, a lot of it is about learning and listening. So yeah, at the end of the day, a podcast from a great person is sometime was actually worth a lot to me in terms of putting yourself into the mindset of meaning many of the business topics are not so difficult to grasp from an intellectual perspective. It's a lot about putting yourself into, let's say, the mindset or the discipline, where it's about framing things in a specific way and sticking into it. And the best way to understand that is sometimes listening to people that did that themselves. And then, last but not least, it's not true that you can outstretch yourself at some point. Yeah, when you come from a technical background, you won't become like a salesperson or a communication person day one, and maybe it's actually not an objective to become so. You have to stay a little bit what you are, because ultimately you have to believe it's also a bit what people are paying for. And it's also about finding around you people that can complement that and actually and it's ultimately about building a team. And I do believe that building, it's not so different to build a great software engineering team or build a great product team or whatsoever, and build a great team in general. Because a lot of it is about being able to understand and trust and help grow people that are potentially very different from one another.
Great. Okay, well, that feels like a wonderful place to live it. Where can people find you? Like, I've seen you been more active on LinkedIn recently. Is that a good place to follow
that's
you?
a great place to follow me and to ask for
And then,
connection.
yes, and then you recently published an incredibly thoughtful essay on the future impact or possible scenarios for the future or impact of AI. Where can people find that, and maybe talk to what it is in a few seconds?
Yeah, it's called Children of AI, and you can find it on childrenofai.florian-douetteau.com. So like Children of AI with my name will pop it up on Google. And yeah, my starting point was actually, well, my kids are pretty old now, especially my daughter is 18, which is a landmark for me, I guess. And so I realized that I was to some extent lucky not to have children now, as in, I'm not sure what will be the future of a kid born today in the context of AI. Meaning, how do they start to learn to speak or read? What is the impact of AI in terms of how you grow as a teenager? What are the dangers and so forth? How do you think about your work life and career, and what are the skills you need to learn in the context of AI becoming more and more prevalent, and all of those things. So that's kind of like the mindset where I wrote this mix of an essay and a fiction, imagining what would be the story of a kid starting their life today.
Okay, wonderful, and yeah, highly recommend it. We'll add the link to the show notes. Thank you so much. You know, as usual, incredibly thoughtful and enjoyable conversation. Really appreciate it, and you know, from a very biased perspective, but congratulations on the incredible journey so far, and very excited for what's ahead. Thanks, Florian.
Thanks, Matt.